We're talking comics, games, and collectibles with Tim Broman, co-owner of Collectors Connection, and Ryan Fleming, owner of Rogue Robot in Duluth, Minnesota.
All right, so we were talking about comic conventions earlier. Now, how many different places have you been to, either as a buyer or a seller, for comic conventions? So how many different locations have you been to? Oh, my God.
I've been to San Diego Comic-Con. I lost track after 7 times.
Okay.
I go to both Minneapolis shows, the spring and the fall. Yeah, SpringCon and fall. I did a lot of different shows in the mall here in Duluth, and I did the one in Virginia. Mm-hmm. And then I actually, I know I've done other comic conventions that I went to, but I forget where they were because they were like flukes where my parents and I would, when I was young, would be out of town, and it just so happened that on that weekend at the whatever center they had a comic show, and we'd run over there really quick so I could check it out and see if there was anything I needed. But I can't remember for life of me what these cities would be. These were things where my parents are going to visit relatives in different cities and stuff, and yeah.
Well, when I got hired at Collectors Connection, my thing was I would stay and watch the store. But he and I have been to North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, all over Minnesota and Wisconsin. Not as a seller, but as a buyer. I've been to the national shows in Cleveland and Atlanta and Chicago. We've been to Vegas together. That was a fun experience. We went to Las Vegas, went to Caesar's Palace, and I'm walking around with this badge, and I put my business card in front of the badge. So my name was Tim, but I put Collectors Connection in front of it, and people would see the card and they go, "Oh, Collectors Connection." Except for when I went to Atlanta, Georgia, I did the same thing. I had my Collectors Connection card on. The guy looks at my card. He goes, "Duluth, Minnesota. That's where they got those pepper cheeseburgers. What was that place called?" And I said, "That's the Pickwick." So the guy remembered the Pickwick. He had not been to Duluth for years, and he remembered that. So that was kind of cool. Worst convention you ever went to?
That was in Virginia. Okay. Some jerk calls me up and says, "Hey, Ryan, I'm doing a show in Virginia. Do you want to buy half a table with me? It's normally a sports card show, but they want to do some comics too." And
How was I to know?
I go, "Well, that sounds good if you want to go halves in on a table." And so Tim came over to my place at really late at night the day before. And I have him pull his van up into my yard so I can load it up with all these comic boxes. I think I had about 14 or 15 comic boxes. Maybe a few less. I'm trying to remember what it was at that time. And I put in a bunch of action figures that I've gotten as convention exclusives. You can only get them at Comic-Con and stuff like that. Or else Chase figures that are just really hard to find. And we load it all up and all nice. And then the next day he comes over to my house to pick me up at I think it was 6 in the morning maybe? I know it was still dark out.
Yep.
And we start making this trek to Virginia. Unload all this stuff onto this table that you always do for a show. And once the mall's doors open, because they were doing it in the mall, in the walkway, once the doors open, all these people come in, and they're all checking out all the tables. I'm the only one with action figures and comics. And every single one of them who walked up to my table kind of gave me a sneer like I was the worst person in the world for bringing these to their card show. And I had a grand total of 0 sales with $0.
I didn't do much better than you. I think I only did about $100 all day because I'm sorry, that afternoon after the morning rush, literally the managers of the stores were coming out and meeting in the middle of the hallway and talking to each other.
And I forget what it was too, but you had sold a box of cards. I forget what it was, but I remember thinking, really, you're going to buy that? Because it wasn't any kind of sports. I forget what it was.
Wrestling.
Was it wrestling cards?
Wrestling cards.
God, go
I had professional wrestling cards. Who knew? Yeah. You bring a little bit of everything if you can.
Yeah.
But, okay, let's go the other route.
Best show?
Best show ever, either as a buyer or as a seller.
Best show as a seller would be any of those mall shows that you did. Actually, okay, the best one was my first one where Pokemon was huge. And as much as I dislike Pokemon, I shouldn't say dislike it. It's not my thing. I'm more into superheroes and stuff like that. But Pokemon was huge. And I would go it was at the mall here in Duluth where Collectors Connection was. I was having sales, but not that much. And I had a bunch of kids ask me, "Don't you have Pokemon? Don't you have Pokemon?" So I walked into the store and I bought 3 packs of Pokemon, busted them out, and priced each card individually. Well, in half an hour, all those singles sold. So then I took that money, brought it into Collectors Connection, bought 6 packs of Pokemon, put them out, priced them. Half an hour, those sold. went in and bought 9 packs of Pokemon.
Couldn't have thought of doing that up in Virginia, could you?
So I did this, like, I don't know how many times, and I still have the sheet where it says what my sales were for my very first show, and it says, like, how much because I was being really, really, really OCD on it, anal retentive, trying to track how much money I sold on everything. And, like, I remember it serves me right. It says, like, comics you made, like, $200 on. Action figures you made, like, $100 or less than $100 on. And then it says Pokemon, $600.
Wow.
And I was just like, yeah. And that's just for me buying 3 packs and then reinvesting the money.
That's just funny.
Yeah. That was the best show I ever had, just because it was so funny. Like, my initial investment on that really was the cost of the table, some comics and some toys, and then 3 packs of Pokemon. So...
Best show I ever went to was the 1989. We went to Twins Fest, which was held at the ground level of the Metrodome down in the Twin Cities. And we were literally on the third base line between home plate and third base. And it was just a magical show. I'd never been to anything that big before. Everybody was buying, everybody was selling, everything was going on. This was 89 was Griffey Jr.'s rookie year, and there was a big buzz going on because Fleer had these baseball cards, and it wasn't the Griffey Jr. rookie that was the big thing. It's this kid named Billy Ripken. He's holding this baseball bat, and on the end of the baseball bat, somebody had written a profanity on the bat.
Oh, boy.
And so all these people were trying to buy this card, and I swear it started off at about $30 a card, and by the end of the show, it was $70 a card. And that's just how big this thing... And Billy Ripken turned out to be a nobody, and the cards these days, they're worth about $15. But people still come in and look for that card because that's, I think it was somebody playing a practical joke on him, and he was holding the bat just perfectly. So you could read the words. It wasn't upside down or sideways or anything. But other than that, that wasn't the reason the show was. It was just a great show. I'd never been to anything that big. The voice of the Minnesota Twins back then, I believe, was the announcer's name was Gordon, and he was the one doing the announcing right next to the, 30 feet away from me on home plate. He's sitting there reading, we got a lost child here, or, Harmon Killebrew will be signing a little bit later over here, and it was just a lot of fun. It was so active, and that was the first time I ever was taken to a place in Minneapolis called Khan's Mongolian Barbecue. And our comic book wholesaler was in the Twin Cities, and he said, let's take you to Khan's. Oh, you're going to love this place. I mean, we got out of the show so late, I'm just starving to death. And we're driving through town, and we're driving by every fast food restaurant you can imagine, and my stomach's just getting growlier and growlier. It's like, oh, this is horrible. And then we get out to this place out in the middle of nowhere, and it's packed. And we go inside, and we sit down, and it's this place that, it's not all you can eat. You basically pick your own food. They cook it for you. And it was wonderful, and I started taking my friends there. And my friends have now taken their friends there. And the last time I kept track of it, I think 40 or 50 people from my being there the first time. I've taken friends who have then taken their friends. And I think it's up to like 40 or 50 people who have been there. And it was just a wonderful weekend all the way around.
My absolute favorite show, though, would just be my first one, to San Diego Comic-Con, because I had no idea that so many people were involved. It takes up like the space of like 3 football fields, all the layers, all the levels of the convention center. And just the sheer amount of celebrities and creators that are there are just amazing. But I never sold anything there, but it was one of those things where you finally even around here, Duluth is kind of a geek town, as I like to say. It's nice. I feel at home here because there's a lot of other people that are geeks. But when you go to Comic-Con, you're like, oh my God, it makes everybody else seem like the minority and not me because I like comics. Because, you go through high school, you try to hide your comic reading addiction or your love for collecting action figures, and your other friends are like, you buying dolls? It's like, they're not dolls, they're collectible figurines. And, you go there, and, you just feel like you're at home, like, yeah. And what's neat, too, is all the friends you make standing in line. It's one of those times where you can, like, stand in line for 2 hours, and you can start a conversation with someone in front of you, and next thing you know, you're, like, exchanging emails and stuff like that, so...
in the comic industry, who's the famous person that you remember meeting and the best experience?
They have to be a tie between Stan Lee and Kevin Smith.
Really?
Stan Lee is so nice to his fans, and he is so excited. Every time you see him on TV, that is not an act. He's really running around shouting Excelsior and shaking your hand and telling you thank you for buying his stuff. And then Kevin Smith, I just like because he remembered me the second time because I deliberately tried to freak him out a little bit so he would remember me the next time I saw him, which was that I told him that all my friends and I got together once a month to watch all his movies in order as a marathon while we wore black robes and sacrificed goats. And so the next time I saw him the next year, I go, hey, Kevin, do you remember me? He's like, creepy goat killer guy. It's like, yeah. It's like...
But for some reason, that name never stuck.
Yeah, pretty much.
See, now my favorite is Eisner, Will Eisner. I met him at a retailers convention of all places.
He was a nice guy.
He was a sweet guy. He was a great, again, like you say, like Stan Lee, he was a great cheerleader for the industry.
Mm-hmm.
He'd get up there on the podium and he was telling you, the best comic book you've ever read hasn't been written yet. The best comic artist you've ever seen hasn't started work yet. And that was kind of how he always, looked to the future. And he had the people standing up and clapping. It was almost like a revival. I mean, that's how good this guy was. And at the same meeting was Dave Sim. And Dave Sim back then was doing Cerebus, and I remember how angry the retailers were with Dave Sim. This was back in the day. Graphic novels are a part of the regular market these days, but back then they weren't. Mm-hmm. And Dave kept his graphic novels in his possession and sold them through his outlet in Canada and refused to let them be sold through the wholesalers. His argument being that the back issue sales, where you have a $2 Cerebus comic now selling for $10, and Dave's argument was, I'm not getting any of that $10. This is where I get my extra monies from the graphic novels. Mm-hmm. And he stood before a bunch of, you all can't see me because you're on a podcast, but I'm a hefty guy, and this room is filled with hefty guys who are, basically models for the Simpsons character, the comic book character. Yeah, and
wait, Mike was there?
No. And Dave Sim is roughly the size of my left leg. I mean, he's not real tall. He's not real bust. He's a little skinny guy. And these guys are ready to, slap this guy in a couple slices of bread and eat him. And he's standing there defending his point. And I admired his tenacity and his willingness to face the music and say, hey, this is my choice. And, I'm sorry you don't agree with it, but this is, how I make my extra income. But it was kind of cool to meet the two of them at the same time. But I really got a kick out of Will Eisner. I shook his hand. I don't do that usually with celebrities. I'm just thinking of this is the same convention where I met Mike Grell.
Oh.
And Grell is a comic artist of some renown, and he was standing in the middle of the room, and on the other side of the room was Peter Gross, who does the book Unwritten. And Peter used to work at Collectors Connection, and Peter's in the comic industry. And so I was making a line for Peter Gross, and Mike Grell gets in my way and goes, oh, I suppose you want my autograph. No, thanks, excuse me. And I kept right on going. And I get over to the other side of the room, and Peter is just laughing his ass off. I can't believe you did that. No, I'm sorry, I wanted to see you. I didn't want to see him. So I didn't really mean to, blow off Mike Grell. It's just like, I'm sorry, I didn't really care for your autograph. Mm-hmm. I'm just not an autograph guy.
Yeah.
I don't really... I'd get an autograph for you, I'd get an autograph for Mike, I'd get an autograph for my nephew, but I wouldn't get one for myself. I'd rather shake your hand and say, hi, I met you, and that would be my memory.
I don't know if this is valid to the conversation at all, but it just made me think about when you were talking about, the Cerebus and him defending his point and stuff.
Yep.
It makes me think of some of the most interesting things I've heard at comic shows. And one I remember is I went to Comic-Con, and Todd McFarlane had not done any public appearances in 7 years because he got big and he didn't like going and getting mobbed. Mm-hmm. But they made a big deal out of that. After 7 years, Todd McFarlane was going to be at Comic-Con, and I went to his panel, and I got the most interesting advice that I loved but would never follow and would never suggest anybody else follow. But they said to Todd, Todd, what's the best advice you can give to somebody who wants to draw comics? And he says, burn as many bridges as you can. And the reason
really?
He said that right there, and everybody was like, huh? And he goes, look at me. He goes, if I hadn't got pissed off at Marvel and made it so I couldn't go back there, I probably would have never succeeded at Image because I probably would have gave up, but I couldn't. I had to succeed. He goes, because no one was going to take me after I left and made a big scene. Okay. So he said, burn as many bridges as you can. And that was just probably the most interesting advice I ever had at a convention. But yeah.
This concludes the second in our series of podcast conversations with Ryan Fleming of Rogue Robot in Duluth, Minnesota, and Tim Broman, co-owner of Collectors Connection in Duluth, Minnesota. Look for part 3 in the future.